Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spoiler Warning Podcast. I'm Christopher Schnese.
And I'm Stephen Miller.
And if you're joining us for the first time, the Spoiler Warning Podcast is a weekly film review program. Each week on the show, we're going to dive in, debate, discuss, and argue over the latest films coming to a theater near you. This week, we're sort of trying to catch up on a number of films we have seen recently. We're going to do a little bit of an Omnibus review here. We're going to handle reviews of Memoir of a Snail, Juror Number 2, A Real Pain, and Small Things Like These. We're going to treat these as sort of like, maybe shorter reviews, but I'm saying that now, 50 seconds into the recording.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. But we I've had some slightly, I've had some work trips come up, and I've been out for a week, and I'm about to be out for another week, trying to find some time to record some things. So we're sort of just mashing everything up into one sort of omnibus review for you. This podcast has always been chaptered, so if you're super interested in A Real Pain, you can jump right to that review. If you're interested in Memoir of a Snail, stick with us because we're starting with that one. So feel free to have fun with this episode. We'd love it if you tuned in for everything, but also you can pick and choose because you have choice, at least in this podcast.
Yeah, at least for like a month and a half. Speaking of A Real Pain, by the way, I have to call Christopher out for inflicting a real pain on me, which is making me watch Smile and Smile 2 and not even having released the episodes. He just wanted to hurt me.
No, that episode is, by the time people are listening to this, they will have that episode. I finished editing it on the plane. Okay. I just have to add all the other stuff and actually post it.
It more like a real plane then.
Yeah, it is not a lost episode. It is ready to come out, basically.
That's good because I don't watch horror movies for nothing. I do this as a labor of love.
But yeah, thank you for calling me out, Stephen.
You're welcome. I'm calling you in.
Yeah. Though people are going to think you're a total jerk because by the time they listen to this, they will have already heard the Smile episode. Because I'm going to edit this one probably on a different plane.
Yeah, smart.
But yeah, so we're going to do this. This is going to be fun. If you've tuned into any of our festival episodes, this is going to be a little bit like that. But this will be for films that you can see now. And if you can't see it anymore in theaters, you'll probably be able to VOD it very shortly. So, yeah. Ready to get started, Stephen?
Oh, I'm ready.
All right. So as I said, we are going to start with Memoir of a Snail. We're going to play the trailer for that film, and we're going to come back and give you all a little review.
Dad used to say that childhood was like being drunk. Everyone remembers what you did, except you.
Good one, Dad.
My twin brother, Gilbert. We had two souls, but one heart.
Look, Gracie.
Rabbit face, rabbit face, rabbit face.
Why are you dressed like an ant?
No, I'm a snail.
Oh, funny.
I believed in glasses half full and silver linings. Life was fleeting, but so precious.
Bravo!
Aww, now she's got a boyfriend.
Life can only be understood backwards, but we have to live it forwards.
Say cheese, Gracie.
Snails never go back over their trail.
Soon as I'm old enough and got money, I'm coming to get you.
Childhood was life's best season. It never lasts, but everyone deserves one. I remember everything.
So that was the trailer for Memoir of a Snail. It is, as you might guess from the title, a memoir. It is sort of like darkly funny, I guess, at times, but also kind of intense. But it's just this memoir of a woman named Grace Puddle, her sort of whole life told through this stop motion style. So, Stephen Miller, what did you think of Memoir of a Snail?
I really had no idea what this movie was when I went down to watch it. I think I texted you saying I was going to see what it was just for, lack of anything to do that evening. And man, I was honestly surprisingly very into this movie. It has this mix of being, I would say, very funny while also being like very dark, pitch black, and seeing that in claymation, like stop motion form, it's just a combination I've never seen before. I've since learned that the director, Adam Elliott, this is kind of his thing. You know, he's even won Academy Awards for like short films in the past for this. So this is on me for not knowing about this already, but something about it just really tickled me. Like I found it moving in places. It was very sad. I laughed a lot. There's a lot of really, I would say, kind of mean humor that I enjoyed here. Things like, there's a family that are deeply religious, and we watch them speak in tongues at some point during this movie. And the kind of blabbering voices they make are just hilarious. There are swinger parents that the character of Grace lives with temporarily that I found pretty hysterical. Flashbacks to the life of her friend Pinky. Just lots of things in this, like, kind of... It's a movie that feels like it is going to be a very heavy, dour, like, look at all the terrible things that have happened to me memoir, but it is lightened with so much kind of silliness, you know, and wit about the different things they've experienced. I found it really, really, really great. I just, like, enjoyed myself the whole way through. It is not a huge film. This isn't the kind of movie that I was like, we have to race out and do an episode-long review of this, but I was really taken by it. It's just like entering the brain of a person who has such a clear visual style and tone that they're trying to hit, and they just like follow it the whole way through. This movie does not bend for the audience. It doesn't try to be a heartwarming thing. It doesn't do what an American animated movie would probably do and try to water things down to be for kids or anything like that. Like, this is just like, hell no. I'm telling a very dark story with a lot of quirkiness and a lot of sad things that happen, and I'm just gonna make you live with it. And I don't know. I was really, really into it. How about you?
Yeah, you know, this is one of the rare things that, like, I entered with no knowledge of what this was. Like, as you said, you kind of were just like, hey, I'm going to see this, you know, just because it's playing. And I was like, whatever, I'm game. So, you know, was happy to check it out. I did not know what I was going to get out of it. And I think, like you, from the jump, I was I was enjoying it a lot because it's so darkly funny. But the longer you sit in it, the more tragic it gets, especially when you start predicting where things are going, where it's like, it's you know, setting up things that are obviously going to go to an even darker place. And it's almost like while you're laughing at the silliness of it, you're also like, Jesus Christ, again. And it kind of just really makes you go through what this person experienced or what the character experienced. And you know, it's really interesting what this did because, you know, you talked about the filmmaker, this being their style, and this is kind of what they do. This film doesn't feel to me like a person just doing the style that they do. This feels almost like the only way I would be able to accept that all these things really happened. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things where, like, if I was just reading somebody's memoir or reading... Or just having somebody like say this is all the stuff they went through, I'd be like, man, there's no way so much stuff happens to one person. But telling it in this story that's like a children's film, but is clearly an adult story with adult stuff and a person dealing with their memory of things when they were younger and only understanding it as an adult and kind of what they've been through, like, you know, whether or not anything of this actually happened, telling it in this style gives me the sort of not momentum, but like it gives me the stamina to make it all the way through all these things and not immediately just go like, come on, eventually something good has to happen to this person. You know what I mean? Like, telling it in the story makes me feel like it's authentic, which is wild because it's so inauthentic visually because it's this super hyper stylized reality that's being told through like snails and stuff, and you know, it's just so interesting how well this works. And even the trailer, like, as it was playing, that was the first time I'd ever seen it. It, like, the music choices in the trailer make it feel like this sprawling epic about a person's life, and it's like, yeah, that stuff is there, but it's riddled with so much tragedy and like really fucked up stuff that, like, it doesn't feel like it was a sprawling epic. It feels like it was just like a, come on. Right. Why do things keep going wrong? So yeah, but all in all, I walked out of it going like, that was a thing that we all lived through.
Yeah.
As we watched it.
Yeah. No, I mean, so one thing that I kind of teased for you when I told you after I saw it that I thought it would be worth watching is I told you that I had one very specific surprise when the credits were rolling, and that was the movie. The name is Memoir of a Snail. It seems like it must be a literal memoir, right? And it feels very much like the kind of thing that is like the one artistic pinnacle of a person who's finally telling their life story. You know, the movie even teased this up where the main character of Grace, she gets into stop motion animation. You know, it kind of does that thing that I think you sometimes hate when movies do, when it like hints at like, here you go. Yeah. I'm going to tell the story that you're watching. But this is not directed by a Grace Puddle. As far as I know, there is no one named Grace Puddle, right? This is directed by Adam Elliott, and pieces of his life are clearly in here. You know, he seems closer to the brother character probably than the character of Grace. He had the same father, you know, a retired acrobat, as the character in the movie, but there's no one-to-one mapping, right? Like this is not a memoir. It isn't a true story. I'm sure it's inspired by real people in his life in some way, but I think that really threw me through a loop and made me question how I would have felt if I knew from the beginning that I was watching a fictional character's account rather than like a piece by piece style, you know, heightened visual telling of a true story. And I think I've landed on, I kind of like it even more for that, because it means that he chose to make this the story. Like he wanted it to be a character just being hammered by grief, but still having like the little glimpse of hope and finding light in the darkness. And I think there's something about the creative blending of fact and fiction that really, in the end, made me like it even more. But when I first saw in the credits that it wasn't by a Grace, you know, or someone whose name is very close to Grace or whatever, I was like, what the fuck? Like, I felt temporarily very cheated. But ultimately it made me respect it.
Of all the movies we watched that end with like bullshit like text at the end of them that are totally made up, the stop motion snail movie about a weird dark past of a person is the one that you're like, wait a second, this is a bridge too far.
Yeah.
Is there no sanctity left in this goddamn world?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I know this is weird, Omnibus, but verdicts? Want to do little verdicts for these?
Oh, yeah. Why not? Sure.
All right, cool. All right, we're going to do little verdicts for Memoir of the Snail. Stephen Miller, if you're going to give us a must-see, recommend with a caveat, wait for rental, pass with a caveat, or a must-avoid, what would you give it?
I'm actually going to go all the way to must-see. Like, even though it should have caveats, because I know this is not for everyone, but it is rare that I've seen a movie that is so 100% sure of itself and unique in its style, in its way of telling stories, and its sense of humor. And I just think this is I'm just going to say it's a triumph, right? Like, that doesn't mean I think it is a masterpiece or the greatest thing I've seen all year, but like, stop motion animation in the traditional way that this is being done takes a lot of time. And the idea that you could rally these resources to do something this idiosyncratic, I have to celebrate it. I just think it's a really, really, really impressive movie. And I'm so glad that I have lived inside the brain of this director for an hour and a half.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be a record with a caveat. That caveat is mostly like, this movie is what it is the entire time. There's not like it's not going to win you back at the end if it's lost you at the beginning. You have to vibe with it, and you're just going to get that whole the time. You know, by the time the two kids experience their second death close within their vicinity, if you're not on board with this film, you're never going to...
Right.
You're never going to crawl your way back from that. So, you know, as they say in the trailer, Snail never crosses over its own path again or whatever. So if you are not vibing by the time that you can just turn it off, because you're not going to get anything different from the rest of it. But if you are vibing, you know, settle back, kick your feet up, grab a beer, because you are going to enjoy it a lot.
Yeah. And one final thing I want to mention, intellectually, I knew Sarah Snook was Australian. I knew that. I don't think I really knew she was Australian until I saw her name in the credits at the end of this movie.
Obviously, you were never watching the after little interview stuff while Succession was airing because, yeah, every single character in that show, you're basically like, what? Once they start talking. But yeah, all right. Moving on. Ready to move on?
Yep. Let's go to film number 2, juror number 2.
That was totally accidental. But yeah, we're going to play the trailer for juror number 2 and then come back and give you a review. Damn it.
It was last October. It was raining, and I hit something. I got out the car and I looked around. I checked, I didn't see anything, and I figured it was a deer that ran off.
Okay, what's the problem?
I got called for jury duty. The Kendall Carter case?
1 year ago, on October 25th, the defendant, James Scythe, and his then girlfriend, Kendall Carter, they had a fight. And he's going to pay for what he did.
What are you telling me?
Maybe I didn't hit a deer.
Let me just ask you one thing. Did you guys ever look at any other suspect? You know what to do.
So that was the trailer for juror number 2, and it's basically the story of a man who gets selected as juror number 2 in a case where a man allegedly murdered his wife, and turns out, he may have some dilemmas on his heart as he tries to figure out how to weigh in on this case. Stephen Miller, what did you think of this film?
So when I first heard about the premise of this movie, it sounded hilarious to me. Just like just the one line premise. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's basically like a man who is a juror in a high profile murder case realizes that he might be the killer, and like with no other context, that is like, you just hear that sentence, you're like, what?
Yeah, is this a Blumhouse film?
Yeah, how is that possible? how could that be true? Like it just, I remember seeing the synopsis and just thinking like, man, Clint is really going off the rails with this one. Like it sounds like a kind of very silly genre-y type idea. But honestly, as I started really watching this movie, I think the premise is like pretty amazing. Yeah. Like I actually think the idea behind this movie is fantastic. I was shocked at how well it worked on me.
I was shocked I had never seen a movie with this premise before. Yeah,
it's such an elegant, because immediately the idea of the person on the jury who is deciding the case has skin in the game. Like that is so ripe for unpacking. So I think the first thing this movie does great is that premise. The premise is just great. Like there's so much you can mine for it. The second thing I think it does well is it fully embraces being a 12 Angry Men riff, basically. Yeah. Like very, very, very directly. And the reason I think that is such a smart move on this movie's part is like, I'm hit or miss when it comes to like this era of Clint Eastwood, but even the movies I kind of like have a few hallmarks of his. Like American Sniper is an example of a movie that I think was decently well made, but I had a lot of problems with. And the hallmarks are like, you've got clunky dialogue, you have characters who are like archetypes instead of people, you have a kind of intense like moral dilemma at the center of everything. It's always very tidy in a way that often feels kind of hollow. Yeah. In a like 12 Angry Men dark riff, all of that worked for me wonderfully. Like, I love that it is a character wrestling with how to do the right thing, and that you have all these different people voicing all of these different conundrums in front of them. Like, I was so vibing with at least the first, like, 45 minutes of this movie, maybe.
Yeah.
Just, like, I couldn't wait to see what they would do. And, like, I think Nicholas Hoult is really good in this role. I think J.K. Simmons is awesome in a character. He's nicer than I've seen him play usually, in a way that I really enjoyed. Yeah. Toni Collette worked on me really well in that first 45 minutes. Everything in my mind, I'm torn between, like, kind of loving this movie, and then the more the plot has to go along and we have to suspend disbelief about the idea of people believing the guilt or innocence of the suspect and people not considering alternate ways that things could have gone down, the more the movie started to lose me. It started to feel a little bit more silly or hard to track with. Like, I don't think for a full runtime I can believe that no one else has kind of sussed out what might have happened to the victim. And so there's things where, like, the Clintness of it kind of overwhelmed me by the end, but, like, man, is the premise so good. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel really torn. Like, I definitely want to recommend this movie. I think it runs out of steam, and I think characters start to be signifiers for, like, really dumb, bureaucratic or moral opinions rather than being believable characters of any depth. And that works really well for, like, an hour, and it doesn't quite work for a whole movie. How did you feel about Juror number 2?
Yeah, so we're 2 for 2 so far in films that I just went to the theater because Steven said he was seeing it. Not even like Steven has seen it and recommended it, but just said, I'm also seeing this. And I was like, I'm there. I will see the new Clint Eastwood film. I'm not really hit or miss. I think I mostly miss in the stuff that Clint Eastwood directs. I'm probably forgetting one thing that I probably said was great that is not coming to mind right now. But anyways, I was just kind of like, yeah, let's see what we get. And like you, as soon as I realized what the premise was, because I hadn't heard that log line or anything, I just kind of like went in and sat down. And as soon as I realized what was happening, I was like, oh my God, this is genius.
Yeah.
So I was already on board with it. And then, like, first I was on board with, you are on a jury. You are realizing that you have a connection to this case. You realize you may inadvertently be the killer. What are you going to do? I was already on board with that. And then they introduced Kiefer Sutherland's character.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh my God, they just doubled down on the premise and made it so much more gray and muddy. I mean,
right.
let's be clear. It is not gray and muddy. What he is going to decide to do becomes gray and muddy. You know, like, this is a film that is ultimately about, can you make up for the mistakes that you make in your past? And then takes that question and flips it on his head and goes, can you make up for the mistakes of your past at the expense of another person? Or should you be forced to deal with the mistakes of your path so that other people don't have to deal with the mistakes of their path, right? Like, it becomes this morally gray question about, like, what can a person knows what the true thing is to do, and what are they going to decide to do the right thing, or are they going to succumb to their own sort of need for preservation and stuff like that? It also adds the craziness with what's happening back at home, his past, the alleged killer's past. Like, this film, everything is set up so expertly that I was like, holy shit, this movie's great. I'm so glad I watched this movie. It's so good.
Yeah.
I think I even went further than you before the turn happened for me. Like, I was vibing it. It got a little clunky, but I was still vibing with what it was doing. And I was seeing the potential for change. What I wanted from this film is, specifically, I wanted it to be 12 Angry Men. And I wanted my cake to be had and eaten. I wanted it to be, I wanted everything to work out for everybody involved. Right.
Yeah.
And I know this film can't allow that to happen, but I still wanted it, right? Like, I wanted a fight to get the person off, but for the wrong reasons, but have it all work out in the end, right? And I think that I was pretty much on board with this film until there is a line that a character utters on the railing of a bridge where it's like he essentially says there's only one way this movie ends. And I just put my head in my hands and I went, oh, you were doing so good and now you're gonna not do good. And I think from then on the film kind of lost me.
So you were like 80% of the movie you were tracking with then.
Yeah, like I like it's one of those things where like I still believe this film is interesting. I just think at the end it adds like two theses that I don't vibe with anymore. And it's like I would almost like, in fact, I would have more accepted if this film didn't yada 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 the last conversations in the room, kept them, then went to read the verdict and then cut to black. And we never knew what the verdict is. If that happened, I would have been like, fucking brilliant movie. I love it. You choose for yourself whether or not he convinced people. You don't know what really happens. Like, I would have loved it. But I think seeing all the things and then seeing the last shot of the movie, I was like, I don't know what you're doing now. Like, I don't believe it. It's just weird. I do love, even though it's in the part that I don't like, I do love the scene on the bench where two characters are talking together and then just summing up the state they are both in and how this is gray for a lot of different people and how they have to, if it cut to black there, I would have been happy. Like there's all these spots where this movie could have cut to black and I would have been like, you know what? Yeah, fucking good. But yeah, for me, that caveat swung in when that character said that thing on the bridge and I just kind of like, ugh.
Yeah,
can't deal with it.
It's a somewhat tough movie to criticize when we're not doing spoilers because unfortunately spoilers are kind of needed. But I think I can say the suspension of disbelief here is that, you know, at 12 Angry Men, the whole idea is injecting reasonable doubt, right? And the arc of 12 Angry Men is 11 people want to convict someone based on surface level. Of course, he's guilty. There's very even direct parallels here, right? Like the person who saw something and thinks they know what they saw, but actually they were older and just wanted to be part. Like there's a lot where this is like laying up like we are doing the same thing. And in the arc of 12 Angry Men is over time, like the jury is being persuaded into, we actually don't know. Like, maybe I don't have proof. And it isn't that I know this person's innocent, but I have enough reasonable doubt now. And the arc of this movie requires you for a very long time to think a lot of people are just like, hell no, he's guilty. Just look at him. Or like, fuck, I don't even care if he's guilty, you know? And there's just like, I buy that to an extent, but there's a degree to which this movie relies on that it starts to lose me. And the plot machinations that we're not going to literally go into at the end require you to believe a lot about human behavior that just feels very black and white and obvious in a movie that is otherwise very gray. It's hard to explain. It's like the desire to have a strong moral lesson and to also have a message about how dysfunctional the justice system is or whatever. It's like it swooped in at the end and overruled all of the interesting nuance that the movie was wrestling with before it. And I was like, man, you were so close to a fantastic movie. You were so fucking close.
So one thing that was really funny that I also kept thinking about during this film and is that, and this is a problem with that I think is only a problem in film and not actually a problem in the real world. But every single trial you ever see in any film or property ever makes me wonder how anybody can ever be convicted of anything. Because it seems so easy to introduce reasonable doubt. Right. Like, especially in this film. Like, I mean, you know, obviously... Obviously, there's one pretty reasonable doubt that just isn't being said out loud in this film.
Right.
But I think every single piece of evidence is always like, yeah, but what if it was anybody else? And you're like, oh, yeah, I guess it could have been anybody else, but I want it to be that guy. But like, I feel like all evidence is circumstantial, and it just seems really, really easy to argue reasonable doubt. And it's like, it makes me wonder, because I've never had to serve on a jury before. You know, I've always... the times that I've, you know, been selected and gone, or not selected, but the times that I have gone, I've always been like, didn't even have to go in and get interviewed. Right. It was just
so you never did voir dire, like where they talk you through all this stuff.
Yeah. It's always been like, all right, you guys don't have to, you know, whatever. You know, I don't know what it is, whether the person, took a bargain or whatever it's called. Like it's just like a thing where it's like I've never had to do it, but like I would either be the best or the worst juror, because I'd be like, I mean, guys, like they only have three
holes everywhere.
Yeah, they only have 3 pieces of evidence, and like even that is like just really shitty evidence. So like, guys, I mean, just let him go. I mean, yeah, he's wearing a T-shirt that says "I did it," but hear me out. That could have been anybody.
Yeah, I mean, like I went through voir dire just like earlier this year, and I didn't get selected, but I did have to watch for days as like the prosecutor and the defense mounted their they basically do a lot of lectures to the jury to try to tease out what they're going to possibly like get caught on or not. So they talk a lot about what it means. And the prosecutor always takes pains to say reasonable doubt does not mean impossible or you can't imagine a scenario where something else happened. It's like, is it likely? Is it reasonable? Knowing all you know, do you reasonably believe it might have been someone else? Yeah. So like and there's always a tug of war where the defense attorney is trying to do the opposite and like squeeze reasonable doubt into impossible, and the prosecutor is like, it's just common sense, y'all. So there is a little bit of a like back and forth here, but I mean, I'm just going to plainly say, because you learn the premise of this case very quickly. It is so obvious, even before you know anything, that an alternate explanation of how she died is like not only possible, but extremely likely. It is so obvious. And the movie treats that explanation as if like no one even thought of it until Nicholas Holt's character dares to kind of bring it up at some point. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, what defense attorney? I understand Chris Messina is like overworked or whatever, but like, how could he not bring that up? How could you possibly not bring it up?
Yeah. I mean, he had the high heels defense.
Mm-hmm. I will say though, like the devilishly clever idea this movie has is like take 12 Angry Men, where Henry Fonda is like the moral hero or whatever, and turn it into all of that moral heroism is actually because he's a fucking coward and he knows something and he doesn't want to say it. It's like, wow, what a mean movie. And I was so here for that idea.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's get to verdicts for this one then. Yeah. Stephen Miller, if you're going to give juror number 2 a number 1. No, if you're going to give juror number 2 a must-see, record with a caveat, wait for rental, pass with a caveat, or a must-avoid, what would you give it?
We, the people of the Stephen Miller jury, hereby find juror number 2. Fuck. It's either wait for rental or recommend with a caveat. I'm honestly going to recommend with a caveat just because the idea is so good. I think it carries you even through the deeper and deeper suspension of disbelief that you have to do as the movie goes on. I think the premise is just too good to not see this, but caveat, I really think it kind of fumbles toward the latter, at least third of the movie, so prepare yourself.
Yeah, it's a recommend with a caveat from me as well. The premise alone is so mineable during those first sections of this film, and I think that honestly it feels like, I don't know whether it was, I guess it had to be the writer. The writers at some point decided, like, I've expressed everything I want to express. I need to yada, yada, yada to get to a verdict so that I can say this next thing that I want to say. And I just don't agree with the yada, yada, yadaing or the next thing. What I would really like, I don't know if you, on Apple TV, Stephen, if you watched the series remake of the film Presumed Innocent, or I guess it's it's a adaptation of both the book and the movie. I love that show. It was great. I would love that type of adaptation of this film because I would want more. I would want the start of the trial, like the pilot episode is just setting up the trial, and then like the next episode is the flashback to what he thinks he remembers, but like it's still left sort of ambiguous, and I would love a final episode that, I mean, there's a reality in which the thing that he thinks happened in the past is not something that even could have happened. So this could all be like pointless. Maybe the guy really is the killer. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But I'm super interested in the premise, and I would like it explored more. So I would have had fun with that.
Yeah. Okay. I need to give you one more thing before we move on, which was my my Boom Goes the Dynamite letterbox review of this movie, this is my second favorite piece of post-pandemic media about a juror played by an actor from an X-Men franchise who's obsessed with whether or not someone is going to recognize him in the courtroom, and who, in a wildly unorthodox move by the judge, is allowed to actually take a field trip to visit the scene of the crime and try to investigate the case for themselves before they reach the verdict. But enough about jury duty. This is juror number 2.
Yeah, it's impossible to watch this movie without thinking about jury duty, even though I wasn't even making the connection of being an X-Men character.
It doesn't help that I didn't watch X-Men First Class, so like I thought Nicholas Hoult played Cyclops because he just has like a Cyclops look to him. So I thought it was going to work even better, and then IMDb made me have to round down my comparison a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's still unless you rewrote it,
I rewrote the X-Men part. I would have said actor who played Cyclops.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Well, that is that film. We are moving on to number 3 now. That is the film A Real Pain, which we did see at Sundance remotely.
We did.
But it's now available for everybody. We've both rewatched it. So we want to talk about it again. So we're going to take a listen to the trailer for A Real Pain and then come back and give you all a review.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system.
Boner
is not available.
Hey, Benji, I just got to the airport. I really hope you left already. Oh, God, you made it.
What's up, cuz? I got some good shit from when we land.
Wait, you're not, like, taking weed into Poland, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Benji?
They don't give a shit about that stuff, man.
I think they very much do give a shit about
that.
Yeah.
We get high in backseats of cars. Davers and I are cousins. We used to be joined at the hip. Our grandma was from here, so Dave arranged for us to join this geriatric Polish tour with you fine people. That's the way we get by. I really needed this, man. I know that it's tough for you to leave your boy. The way we get by. We don't really have anything going on.
I know it's been a tough few months for you, so...
I also want to say that I know you're not the most comfortable person with people.
I'm not?
No. Does it look real?
Well, they're twice the size of you in metal, so...
You sure you don't want to come up here?
I'm good. Can you take my picture?
That's what I'm talking about. Marcia!
Thank you, David.
But it's amazing that you're here, putting yourself out there so boldly for me.
Thank you, man.
Let's go smoke a joint.
Word of warning, this will be a tour about pain.
Our grandmother and Benji were super close.
I mean, she was the coolest. I've just been in a real funk, I guess, since she died. Just haven't,
You ain't alone. You're looking back at the horrors of your family history.
We completely cut ourselves off from anyone else's true pain.
Why are you doing this?
Oh, man, you used to, like, feel everything.
Obviously, there are triggers along the way.
We're not at the right station.
And you didn't wake me up.
Oh, you're having such a good nap, dude.
Jesus
you were like,
Christ, you're on a tour group with
I know, I just didn't have the heart to wake you up.
Has he always been like this?
I love him, and I hate him.
What the flying jeez?
And I want to be him.
You used to cry about everything.
Yeah, it was awful. Who wants to cry about everything?
We're in a Holocaust tour. If now is not the time to grieve, I don't know what to tell you.
Right, so that was the trailer for A Real Pain. It is the story of two cousins played by Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg, who their grandmother has passed away and has, in her like will or something, has left them some money to take a trip to Poland to see where she grew up, and they decided to go on a tour together. And this is sort of their little road trip movie where they deal with lots of stuff.
Yeah.
Stephen Miller, what did you think of A Real Pain?
So, like you mentioned, we both watched this at Sundance. I have not gone back to listen to my review and our kind of quick summary of everything we caught. I remember liking this quite a bit, but not being quite blown away by it the way that other reviews were giving it. And also, if I remember correctly, you felt after seeing it. I'm so glad I watched this a second time because... God, is this movie good? like being able to see it in a theater just with like no distraction on a big screen, and honestly even just more primed for it. I mean, knowing where this movie was going to go, what the premise was, what tone it was going to strike, within like 5 minutes, I felt like crying watching this movie. There's just something about it that just right away just hit me like a ton of bricks. I think it is such a incredibly confident film that Jesse Eisenberg has directed, and it's basically like Memoir of a Snail in a weird way. It is a portrait of a very specific character, and it is so dedicated to representing them well that even if they're like totally an invention, it doesn't matter. Like, this character feels real, you know. And in this case, it is Kieran Culkin's character, the cousin whose name I've already forgotten, unfortunately, Benji. Yeah. Benji is so specific. He's heart open, he's perceptive, he's sensitive, he's the life of the party, but he's also volatile. He's trying to understand a world that isn't comprehensible. It's almost like a Swiss Army Man type character of like, let me understand why the world is what it is, because this doesn't fucking make any sense. And Jesse Eisenberg is like I am the, quote, adult. I'm the neurotic person who knows how to live in the world, and I've come to terms with all the contradictions. Let me tell you how to be. And this movie is like a blending of those two people and just a back and forth of like, let's grapple with the heavy things about living, the heavy things in our history. You know, I'm sure this is also very specifically a Jewish film that I don't have access to all of those parts. So for me, it's more like the universal parts of human suffering. It's just so good. And like, Kieran Culkin is just, I truly think he should get an Oscar nom for this performance, because he just like brings this character to life. This guy who can bring people together and lash out at them and then come back with his tail between his legs a little bit. And like that, he's just so incredible to watch in this movie. And I was just completely taken by this. I think in a weird way, this would pair very, very well with, Zone of Interest from last year that I loved, where that was a movie about people refusing to look at the terrible things right next to them, like not being willing to look at the sun. And this is about like, what if there's a guy that like looks at the sun? Like what does it feel like to fucking do that, you know? Yeah. And man, I don't know. I love this thing so much watching it a second time. Did you still love it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it was my favorite thing we saw at Sundance. At the time, I was a little bummed that you weren't as high on it as me. Mm-hmm. It was a film that like I booked purely from the image, which was just Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg standing next to each other. Didn't know what it was about, really. It was just called A Real Pain, and it was the two of them. And I was like, let's do this. And what I got was a very, very touching, beautifully performed, beautifully acted, everything film that really sucked me in, made me cry at the end of it. Like, I just really, really felt it, and I was vibing with everything it was doing. Both Kieran Culkin's performance and Jesse Eisenberg's performance, and both of their characters, who they are, how that meshes together, like everything about it was perfect. And watching it a second time, it only heightens everything, because Kieran Culkin's his performance is undeniably good. But once you have the entire context of the film, it really shows how good it actually is, because you know what he is performing. You're not just, there's a scene in the film where Jesse Eisenberg talks about what Benji's character does when he walks into his room. And the first time you're watching the film, you are mostly absorbing that, right? Like who he is, what he does when he moves into a place, like his rashness, but his also genuine like humanity that he has, and like his sort of, he's bouncing back and forth between a lot of emotions, but you can't help but like be sucked in by his charisma and then turned off by his like brashness, right? Yeah. And like as that happens, and that is what you're focusing on. But once you have the entire context of the film, you rewatch his performance in those scenes. I'm just like constantly blown away by like what he is doing and what that means. And, I agree. He should also get at least an Oscar nom for his performance here. My worry is that like the people that would nominate him have only watched it one time. Right. You know what I mean? So you can't really absorb everything that he's doing. But yeah, I love that I watched this again. This is something that like I didn't need to watch again. Jamie was interested in seeing it, so we were going to try to find time to eventually catch up. I just moved that time up to this morning, and I'm very, very glad that I did rewatch it again, just because I was blown away a second time. And like, as you said, there is that immediacy of that emotion that kicks in way sooner than it did the first time. And I think it's because we have all the information now. And it's like, I am reacting to the end of this film in scene one. You know, like there's like, you see a scene of just Kieran Culkin like sitting just in a weird state. And to his brother, his cousin, he's like, hey, you know, what's up? You cool? But like that question to him and the emotion he's giving means so much different stuff by the end of this film that like, I love this. This film is just so expertly crafted. And I love that it has even more impact the second time around.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience with the opening scene, basically, of just like knowing what you know about who Kieran Culkin is playing. It's like every early moment feels so emotionally profound. You know, it's just I love when a movie can be small but huge about its smallness. You know, and this is one of those movies to me. I'm like, I might catch it a third time just to get Joanna to watch it. Because now I feel like this is the kind of movie that like has to be shared. So yeah, seriously a home run.
All right. Verdicts then for this one. Stephen Miller, if you're going to give it a must see, rec with the caveat, wait for rental, pass with the caveat, or a must avoid, what would you give it?
Must see. This movie is fantastic.
Yeah, must see for me also. I loved it back then, love it now. I will probably love it in the future. So people should definitely check this one out. All right, and that's going to bring us to our last film, which I definitely have never confused the title of, and I know that it is Small Things Like These. So we're going to take a listen to the trailer for Small Things Like These, and then come back and give you a little review.
Girls.
Hi, Dad.
How are you getting on? Come on now, finish up your toast before it gets cold.
I will live in the past, the present, and the future. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach.
You'd want to watch what you'd say about what's there. People can make things difficult for you.
Ever question it?
The Lord is compassion and love, slow to anger and rich in mercy. No, don't be thinking you're in any trouble. The Lord is compassion and love.
If you want to get on in this life, there are things you have to ignore.
That was the trailer for Small Things Like These. It is a film starring Cillian Murphy, and it is he is a coal salesman, and it's sort of about him dealing with some memories from his past and how that kind of ties into some stuff he's seeing around the community around where he lives. Stephen Miller, what did you think of Small Things Like These?
Yeah, so this is kind of a trend for honestly everything we watched, if we include our Sundance viewing of A Real Pain, which is that I did not have a clue what this was about when I sat down to watch it. And I found it to be a really kind of powerful, I'm going to say compelling viewing experience. In my text to you, I kind of likened this movie to After Sun, and I didn't necessarily mean in terms of quality. Like, After Sun was my favorite movie of the year, so that's kind of hard to beat. But Small Things Like These is the kind of movie where it's willing to let the audience wait to figure out what it's about at their own pace. You know, and in my case, it took most of the movie to like really figure out literally what was happening.
Yeah.
But just like how After Sun worked for me because it carried the feeling of a person who's hunting for answers even before you know what that feeling is necessarily latched onto, this movie carries the feeling of someone who is trying to avoid a very painful truth. And as I watched the movie, I could read it as avoiding just the pain of suffering around him, you know, the poverty inherent to his community, the sadness of other people. I mean, honestly, this would pair really well with A Real Pain. I think they're very different, but they're both about like people not knowing the degree to which they should look away or stare at something difficult that might bring up sadness for them. And it is such a muted movie, like probably muted to the point where I would wager a guess that you did not love it, but we'll find out when you talk on your side. But like, I think Cillian Murphy is so good in this movie. You just are like, you feel him observing the world, you feel his sadness and the kind of trauma that he's trying to cope with. And when the plot, which I'm going to just dance around, even though in Wikipedia it's going to use a phrase that if you know anything about history means you'll kind of know what the movie's about the moment you read the synopsis, but I will not give that. When you figure out what it's about, and in the final kind of like 10 minutes of the movie, there's a shift in tone. I found it just intensely moving because it's like repressed, finally, like here is something, you know, and I can't explain it. For the first maybe 30 minutes or something, I was kind of, I don't know, I was paying attention. I cared about Cillian Murphy's character, but I was feeling a little restless of like, okay, when is the plot going to happen? You know, when are things going to occur in the movie? And by the end, I just was like, wow, I went through a whole experience and I am very happy for that experience. So the levels are probably maybe a little too extreme of just how muted it is given how big the subject matter is, but like Zone of Interest, like other things I've talked about, I like when people play with those levels, and this movie really worked on me. How about you?
Yeah, I think that for me, I had no problem with the mutedness of this story. Like, I like the way it tells itself and the way it slowly doles out the information. You find out why these memories from his past trouble him, so how that connects to the things he's seeing around him. And, you know, I think it's a beautiful way to tell this story. I think the crescendo it arrives at, it leaves me a little wanting in like more to happen. Like where we arrive at the end is a metaphorical, like it is actions that represent a desire for change in the world, but not necessarily you know, they can take our lives, but they can never take our freedom. Right. This is not a overwhelming change in anything, really. It is a desire to change for something. This is a film that, like, for me, it's one of those films where I can tell that I could tell while watching the film that it was going to end with a bit of text that explained the context of the movie that was being made, right? This is a film that definitely, like, you know why the filmmakers wanted to make this story. It's kind of like, honestly, you know, I think After Sun is a good comparison mood-wise, right? Where, like, as you're watching it, it might drag a little bit. You wonder what it's about, and then you start to get more what it's about the further into it you get. So totally, I get that. But it also feels a lot like the one about the dad who drives the cab in Japan that we saw at the other film festival.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
The name is escaping me too. You keep talking and I'll figure it out.
But yeah, so that it feels like that film, like that film was made to highlight a thing that exists in the world, a state of being, and how people deal with it. And this film was in a very similar way was conceived of to shine light on a situation that people deal with, and I see that in the way the story plays out, because it is about the toll and the feeling and the emotion around the subject matter, but is not necessarily a 100% complete thought on its own, right? It's all about how do you communicate what it feels like to exist and witness this and be a part of it, but not necessarily this is a story of its own that is on its own enough to like totally grip me, right? It's like I feel what it's doing, I appreciate what it's doing. I wasn't off put by anything. It's like I was totally on board with what it was doing. It's just its triumph is that it got us to watch the movie,
right?
Not that the character necessarily triumphs in anything specifically themselves. So it just I don't know how to sort of bounce that in my head. So it's like I appreciate this film, but it's not necessarily something that like just like hit me with a wallop or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think your comparison to A Missing Part is what it's called. Is a good one in the kind of deceptively moving way it unearths this real phenomenon that it wants to talk about, and it wants to bring the audience along for it. I think maybe what is different for me is I think small things like these, yes, it is certainly about that very real, very recent history that, again, I'm dancing around. Not to spoil the Nickel Boys, but there will be other movies that similarly talk about difficult histories being unearthed, like that we probably will review later this year too. And like, it's definitely doing that. I think this movie is mostly about the phenomenon of people wanting to ignore a difficult thing in general. It's about the social phenomenon. It's about just keep your nose down, you know. Honestly, the timing is pretty nice right after the election, right? This is about like how people who are maybe struggling financially, like struggling to get by, the temptation to not look at harm that might be inflicted on your neighbor because you just have to survive, you know? And in that vein, I think nothing that happens to Cillian Murphy is huge in terms of impact on the world, but I think the shift inside of himself is like it's a triumphant shift of I am not going to be that way anymore. Like this thing, this gravitational pull of don't look. I am going to be someone who looks. And to me, that worked really beautifully. Definitely in terms of actual dramatic stakes and affecting change in the world, the movie cuts to black way too early if that was the movie you wanted to tell. But I think if this is about the more abstract feeling of wanting to avoid uncomfortable truths that are happening around you and the rallying cry of find it within yourself to do the right thing anyway, then I think this movie does tell a complete story. And that's kind of how it hit me. Of course, then I spent a while on Wikipedia afterwards learning about the true history too, which was the secondary thing that also definitely is what the filmmakers, and I assume the author of the book that came out a couple of years ago that this is based on, it's doing both at the same time.
Yeah, it's also inadvertently a pretty good pairing with Juror number 2.
Yeah, I know.
Like you have the ability to actually help others in their situation, but it will cost you potentially your situation, and just kind of that balance of what do I do is. Yeah. But you know, Cillian Murphy is way more traumatized by his memories than Nicholas Hoult is.
Certainly. Yeah, it is weird how there's like ripple effects in the movies that we're talking about today. We really picked 4 kind of bummer films to discuss.
Yeah, but we have said, you know, like in our State of the Pod episode, that we do enjoy the bummerness of things.
100%.
All right. Well, to figure out how much we enjoyed the bummer, we do have to talk about verdicts for this one. So, Stephen Miller, if you were going to give Small Things Like These a must-see, recommend with the caveat, wait for rental, pass with the caveat, or a must-avoid, what would you give it?
This is where I'm going to have to do a rating that reflects more of the practical realities of watching it than my feelings, because I'm giving it a recommend with a caveat, because I have to give a huge caveat. Like, this movie, it really makes you wait for it. And to your point, the arc isn't huge and it cuts very early. I can totally imagine feeling unsatisfied by it. I felt like I had to dig for a little bit afterwards of like, wow, what did I just watch? You know, I wish I could watch it a second time, honestly, to see if a Real Pain type thing happens to me on round 2. So big caveat, but the recommend is strong, and probably in my heart it is a must-see, because it's just the kind of work of art that I find very powerful. You know, it just moves me a lot, and I really, really respect the commitment to it, and I think Cillian Murphy is awesome in this movie. But I'm going to be a realist, recommend with a caveat. You know, it's a tough sit, but man, there's some good in there for sure if you're willing to have that sit.
Yeah. For me, you know, as I said, it's a film that I appreciate more than I genuinely like. So I'm going to leave it as a wait for rental. But that's not to knock it. It's just like, for me, where the character arrives by the end of the film feels incomplete. It feels like a start, not a end. And I would want more from it to be fully satisfied by it. But performance is great. The subject matter, you know, it's doing a great way of communicating this. So happy to do it. And I will say too, to caveat higher is, you know, I had to rush out of the theater to get back to record this episode. But as I walked out, everybody remained in their seats. And that, you know, doesn't usually happen for like the smaller films. Like, you know, the people were just kind of like sitting there, chilling, sitting with the ending of the film. So take that as a positive lift from my wait for rental is not intended to push people away from it. I just want people to know that people are very much vibing with this film. Cool. All right. So we knocked out 4 things. Maybe a little bit bumper topics, but films that everybody should be happy to check out. But we're going to take off, end this episode. Steve Miller, if people want to find you throughout the week, where can they do that?
People can find me at Threads and Blue Sky at sdavidmiller and sdavidmiller.com.
People can find me at ChristopherInRealLife.com or ChristopherIRL at a number of social platforms. You can find the podcast over at thespoilerwarning.com, where you can get a bunch of the back episodes of the show. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do so in Overcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts are found. If you want the episodes to go live, you can follow us at twitter.com/spoilerwarning, facebook.com/thespoilerwarning, or instagram.com/thespoilerwarning. If you want to get a hold of us directly, you can send an email to fans@thespoilerwarning.com, or you can use the contact form on our site. I am going to take off for another week, but I will be back next weekend. We're probably going to be doing a review of Gladiator 2, because that's the big thing that comes out. I do get back Sunday night, though, so we might have to record later in the week.
We'll figure it out.
But we'll figure it out. I might see it while I'm in Boston, so. But, yeah, we'll be back. Hopefully you enjoyed this Omnibus episode, and we'll see you all in the Gladiator 2 review later.
Bye.
Me and my friends dance until we drop, and the good times don't stop.